Hi, everybody, and welcome to the last of the debate sessions. We have the last four sets of groups debating today. Just before we start, I'd like to remind everybody watching this that the views being expressed by the people talking today do not necessarily represent their personal opinions. They did not pick their debate topics and they did not pick their position on those debates. I gave them to them. So, as a result, please don't get cranky if you hear someone saying something you don't agree with, because they might not necessarily think that. So, with no further ado, I'll just remind everybody the rules. Each team gets up to 4 minutes for opening arguments. I will time you and I will remind you when you're at 30 seconds in time. After those opening arguments, each team gets what we call a 2-minute rebuttal. During those 2-minute rebuttals, you do not necessarily present any new material, but you are just supposed to pick holes in what the other team said. So it's worth having a Google browser going while the other team is making their arguments to see if you can spot any barefaced lies. And then after the rebuttals, we have 1 minute of sort of summary and closing statements. At that point, we will that'll be open for questions to the public, and then finally we will vote on who we think is the winner. Is that all clear to everybody? Just a nod. Good. Okay. So the first debate is mammoths should be brought back from extinction using cloning. And we'll start with the yes they should team. You have 4 minutes for opening arguments starting from now.
All right. So, obviously, my side is that I think mammoths should be brought back through cloning. And I know that you said that a lot of these are not our personal opinions, but that is my personal opinion, is that I think mammoths should be brought back through cloning. They can restore so much biodiversity. We talked about the mammoth steppe, about the environment that they mostly lived in, and about how it can actually help um, cool down the earth. I don't know if that makes sense, but the regions that these mammoths lived in are in the tundra. What is the tundra right now? If the mammoths are restored to these areas, they can restore the mammoth steppes, which can grow a ton of grass instead of just having these really blank areas of land. Um, On to my next point. Mammoths have been researched for, like 20 plus years for, what is it? For actual cloning. Um, just recently, I think it was like 3 years ago, they managed to transplant a nuclei. I think it was a damaged nuclei into a mouse cell, and it actually began to, come back. So they're getting more and more close. I think a huge thing for my argument is that um, not necessarily mammoths coming back, but using the research that has been put into mammoths to bring back other species. So if we actually manage to clone a mammoth species, it will become a lot easier to start cloning other endangered species and extinct species. I know recently the blue macaw, from Rio has just gone extinct. That was like last year. If we can pull off bringing mammoths back that went extinct like 4,000 years ago, we can actually start bringing back these other species that actually went extinct in our lifetimes, which I think is so important to bring back so much more biodiversity to our planet. I think a huge thing that we need to be thinking about is also what mammoths can do for us. I mean, we look at um, what elephants do. I mean, they're not like a huge part of our everyday lives, but if we can start cloning things, we can start using them as actual resources, because not like an infinite supply, but we will have enough so that they can be used. Meat is a huge thing because these mammoths are ginormous. Wool is huge thing for them. I mean, again, they're huge. One of my partners actually came up with jewelry, which I guess is kind of it's not my favorite argument, but it does fit because ivory is it's like a black market item at this point, because the selling of ivory has become so illegal. And at least in the US, I know it's illegal. I don't know about Africa and China. Um, I know that if we bring back mammoths, they can really help with the climate change. I mentioned that earlier with the tundra steppes. I want to go a little bit more into detail. The grassy plains actually have a cooling effect on the world because there isn't as much bare ground that's going straight like to the air. I don't know if that really makes sense.
You have 30 seconds, just as a reminder.
Okay. Just in closing, I think that there's just way too many benefits not to bring back mammoths. Yeah. So sorry.
No, you're good. Okay, that's opening arguments for bringing back mammoths. The team against bringing back mammoths, make sure you're unmuted. You have 4 minutes for opening arguments, starting now.
Okay, so I'm going to start with our opening arguments. And as we've talked a lot about in this class, it's very difficult to make a lot of environmental arguments without bringing up a financial argument to back that. And so the backing for it is, scientists have said that a minimum that this would cost is about $10 million. And I mean, bringing back mammoths would be cool, but what would be we could spend that $10 million on a lot of other things that would be much more beneficial to the environment. Like there are a lot of other things that we could do that money could be put to good use. Also, as we've said, the cloning research and experimentation is not completely done yet. So we are still we do not have the technology to bring mammoths back currently. And that would just mean even more research and more money to even get to that point that we have the technology to even start bringing mammoths back.
Okay, my turn. Okay, so another problem with bringing back mammoths is that ecosystems aren't static. The conditions that they lived in then is completely different to how they would live now. And the problem with that is that we don't really have a good place to put them. And so they would just be confined to like zoos and parks and stuff like that, which brings up an ethical argument, which we'll talk about later. Yeah. I mean, we could make a habitat for them or provide a place for them to live, but that would take more money and more resources, and that would displace other animals. And also there's a huge risk that mammoths and people will run into each other, and that could cause property damage and the loss of human life potentially, because they won't know how to deal with each other, basically. And that's it for me.
Okay. So the mammoth is a large animal, and as such, large animals tend to wander. Ergo, many trampled plants and other biodiversity would be destroyed by this. And although mammoths can help spreading seeds, their presence would disrupt ecosystems and other biodiversity. Mammoths ate grass, shrubs, and roots, and this would take away from other animals' food sources, regardless of any animal size, but specifically mammoths are about the size of the modern African bush elephants and would consume a large amount of this resource. And typically they would consume about 130 to 666 pounds of food each day. And mammoths also enjoy Arctic climates, and with climate change, global warming, and melting ice caps, this would be problematic.
Okay, you guys still have a minute if you want to finish up.
Another problem with mammoths is that they need microbes in their gut to help them digest all this food. And the problem is microbes evolve and change like crazy. And so this is a potential problem for mammoths' health. If we were to bring them back, we would also need to figure out a way for them to safely digest their food.
Then there's the effect that it might have on people's view on conservation. If we could just undo the extinction of animals, then why should we care if they go extinct? We can just unextinct them when we want to. And why? The other thing is they went to extinct with very little help from us. At that time, we did not have the tools to hunt effectively enough to make it a good option to hunt them. So it was a very rare thing for us to do. So since we didn't do it, putting it in, it would go extinct without our help anyways. Then there's the fact that
You're just out
in
of
the
time.
cloning process.
Yeah,
Wait, are we out of time?
Yeah, you're just out of time, so I'm going to have to stop you there. So keep the information handy, and we can bring it back up later. Okay, we're now going to go on to the rebuttals. So the team that is for cloning mammoths, you are not supposed to present any new information, but you can pick holes in the other team's argument, if that makes any sense. You have 2 to 3 minutes starting from now.
All right, so a couple things. Adam's argument that $10 million is too much to be spending on research is it's not too much to be spending on research to be bringing back the mammoth species. I think that the global, at least the US, has been working on genetics for a very, very long time. So I don't think that they have any problem spending $10 million on a small project that can benefit the ecosystem, the world ecosystem so much. With what Rebecca said about mammoths not being hunted to extinction, they actually were by Paleo Indians. They were hunted 42,000 years ago, and then they died off about 4,000 years ago due to overhunting from these Paleo Indians. I think it was Alidia. Sorry, I don't know if I said your name right. She's talked about ethics. So the thing about mammoths right now is that, yes, we don't have the exact technology to be cloning mammoths right now. Right now, I know that they are working on hybrids, which also brings in your microbes, is that if we have a elephant mammoth hybrid, using cloning, we can do that. They don't need to have those microbes, which they can be put out into the wild. And then with what Mimi said about not having enough food for them, again, back to my tundra, restoring the tundra back into a mammoth steppe is the key to making sure that the mammoth species can actually thrive in the wilderness. It will take a little bit of work. I'm not going to say that's going to be super easy, but I think that if we can return that mammoth steppe, we can totally bring back mammoths and have them as part of the world ecosystem. I think it's super important to bring them back in, because not only that, we can start looking at mammoths. How cool would that be? And just being able to study that, I mean, it's just the possibilities become endless once you start being able to clone an older species, because you can start bringing back other species. I don't want to sound super dumb, but like Jurassic Park obviously will not happen, because their DNA genome, their nuclei is too damaged to actually be able to bring back. But these other species that are frozen in ice definitely should be researched and should be brought back.
Okay, that's you up for time. The team against cloning mammoths, you have 2 to 3 minutes of rebuttals starting from now.
Okay, I can start. One thing that was brought up was using mammoths as resources, like as meat and wool and ivory. It would make a lot more sense, and it would be a lot more financially beneficial if we focused on cloning animals that were already alive and use them for resources. Like if we wanted more ivory, why not just bring back elephants? Why not just bring back rhinoceroses? If we wanted more wool, why don't we just make more sheep? And if we wanted more meat, why don't we just clone more cows?
And also, you mentioned that bringing back mammoths would open up the opportunity to bring back more animals that went extinct more recently, while it'd be cheaper and more possibly easier to bring back animals that we have caused to be extinct in the first place. And while we didn't play a huge role in causing mammoths extinctions within all of our own lifetimes, we have been causing extinctions after extinctions.
Then there's the environment. So there's no guarantee that the environment will go back to the way it was before. It could damage a lot of the environment now because there's no predator to keep them in check, so they can just run wild.
That was going to just be the only thing I was going to say. Is there's no way you could introduce this large of a herbivore into an area and say that you're going to spread and restore biodiversity if you don't also bring back some sort of predator aside from humans that will be able to control the species, because otherwise this thing is just going to tear through all of the biodiversity and all of the plants that we grow to help feed it. It's just going to tear through it if we have no other natural way of preying on this thing.
It's like what happened with the elk in Yellowstone before the wolves were reintroduced.
And then you also mentioned the restoration of the tundra, which is important and should happen. But restoring the tundra for one, to create a habitat for the mammoths, when the restoration really should just be for restoration and conservation for all biodiversity there. And also is if we're changing and fixing a habitat for that, reason to reintroduce an animal that existed thousands and thousands of years ago with all of these varying issues, including the microbiomes and including the environment, and the $10 million, which are, I believe it was 10 million, which could easily go to more important projects, which includes things inside of the country, especially since we have such a large economic wealth gap.
We're just running out of time here, Mimi.
Sorry. But with all these changes that we're having to make, it'd make more sense to do make these changes that would be more beneficial to us, honestly, as humans, but to also other biodiversity that is going extinct, living, that we caused extinctions, etc.
Okay. So now the closing arguments. We're going to start. You get about a minute. We'll start with the team for cloning mammoths. You have about a minute for wrapping up, starting from now.
Cloning mammoths, I think just in all, can really bring a lot more biodiversity to our planet. It can really start to forward our work on becoming more ecologically friendly. Humans have a really hard time with being more, I guess, aware of what they're doing to our environment. If we start doing mammoths, we can start doing other species, and I think that's super important. We can even start doing plants and bring back megafauna. I think that's super important, especially with all the carbon that's in our atmosphere right now. Bringing back megafauna is a huge thing. I just think that there are more benefits to bringing back mammoths than there are content.
And I agree with that. Like, there's always lots of things that are put together for us to be able to use. Like, cloning the mammoth will really help us understand the importance of being able to help others. Because, like, yeah, it's going to be difficult, but yet there are so many greater possibilities of helping others be able to see the great progress from cloning something that we have frozen in a block of ice to experiment and to learn and to grow.
Okay, that's the closing arguments done for the for team. We'll now have the closing arguments for the against team. You guys have got about a minute, starting from.
So you can't talk about bringing things back that were already extinct without talking about Jurassic Park, like David mentioned. So I just wanted to quote probably the best quote from the movie, and it's, "They were so preoccupied with whether or not they could that they didn't stop to think of whether or not they should." And that would be my only thing, is most of the arguments have been made that have been it'd be really awesome to bring back mammoths, to study them and look at them. But there aren't a whole lot of thoughts on what they could potentially do after being extinct for so many years, how our environment has adapted without them. And so my only concern would be whether or not we're bringing them back to recreate an environment, or whether or not we're bringing them back to recreate a zoo.
Okay, that's spot on. Righty, we're now going to open up for questions from everybody. If anyone that's not in one of the groups has a question, please feel free to just unmute yourself and let them know and sort of identify which group you are asking the question to. I've got some stinkers, so just in case nobody has anything, I'll be coming up with them. Okay, I'll give that 5. Okay, so this is first up going to the for team, so for cloning mammoths. One of the things that was raised a little bit was the de-extinction, the ethics of it. And they talked about the ethics of whether or not you can actually keep these things going and stuff like that. But mammoths, like elephants, have complex social interactions. They have a matriarch, they move in packs, they have dominant males that exist on their own. If we bring back just the organisms themselves, we're not bringing back that social hierarchy. We're not bringing back that social structure. So just wondering how would that impact your desire to bring them back, knowing that you would essentially be bringing back these sort of social pariahs that were unable to interact with members of their own kind?
Okay, I think that, I think it kind of depends. I think that instinct can take over in a lot of instances. I mean, if you look, there was actually a clone named Dolly the sheep. She interacted entirely the same as a normal sheep. I don't think it really matters if, the cells that we've got are from 42,000 years ago. I think instinct will always kick in no matter what. So I don't think we really have to worry about introducing these mammoths and not having them know what their social hierarchy is supposed to be.
And like animals are like super able to adapt and change their behaviors according to their environment. So like if we do bring them back, the nature of them will still be able to adapt to help themselves to grow and to strengthen their knowledge. And they'll be able to do that exact same thing and be able to progress even without having that basic background or knowledge of their grouping and all that. They'll be able to just pick up new ones if needs be, or they'll be able to bring back, like was mentioned, that it will bring back the former stuff as well from the DNA and all that.
Okay, and then this is to the against cloning for extinction. I'm going to make this a little bit broader. Rather than just focusing on mammoths, talk about de-extinction of many species. So there's been many instances of when species have gone extinct, but their ecosystem still exists quite happily. However, the ethics behind de-extincting things is still brought up. So do you think it's reasonable to bring something back if its environment still exists and if everything is still sitting there waiting for it?
I would say I was reading something about this, that it's like, I mean, obviously nature and animals are very adaptive, and it was just saying that it's like these creatures and like they will go extinct and their environment goes on without them, but it doesn't usually remain the same. It usually adapts to its current, standing. And so I'd say I could see the ethics in it, assuming that things had remained the same as they were when the creatures were first extinct. But I mean, given thousands upon thousands of years, there are subtle differences that'll happen with adaptation. And it's those little subtle differences that can be detrimental to the reinstating of these creatures that could seriously, affect the environments. But, that's my take.
Okay.
And I think that bringing the animals back, I mean, there's obviously things with certain circumstances and such, but is typically a positive thing. But it would heavily depend and need to be observed with that environment, because if for whatever reason it is, that animal couldn't thrive or even continue to live in that environment, there's obviously an issue with either maybe them with it or a predator, whatever it is. And so getting to the root of that and seeing how that species can thrive would be important.
Okay, that's good. Righty, the last bit we're going to do today for this debate is we launch a poll to see who won. There's going to be, in this poll, are two questions. One is, what is your position on the topic? The second is, regardless of your position, which team do you think won the debate? It should be up now. Feel free to vote for yourself. If you want, no one's going to be double checking. So,
do we have to say what position we debated for, or what our actual position is?
No, what your personal position on the topic is. Okay. Righty. That is interesting. Okay, so the results. The majority of you, 70%, are actually against bringing back mammoths, but it was a dead heat in terms of who they think won the debate. So there were several people in there who, even though they're against bringing back mammoths, they actually thought it was a pretty equal debate. So well done, you guys. Round of applause. Righty, I'm just going to pause the recording for 2 minutes. Just take a 2-minute break to sort yourselves out, and I will be back in 2 seconds. And we'll start with the second one. If you've already talked, please hang on. Okay, everybody, we're now going to come into our second debate. This is looking at whether or not vehicle use should be limited in Cache Valley to increase air quality. This is a topic that I suspect is very close to an awful lot of our hearts. We're going to start the same format as before. We'll start with the team that are saying yes, vehicles should be limited in Cache Valley. You have 4 minutes for opening arguments, starting now.
Okay, and then I do have some slides, so I just click
give me
share
a second.
screen.
I'll let you share the screen. Give me 2 seconds.
Okay.
You should be able to share screen now.
Oh, interesting. Oh, sorry. Okay, I won't use it. Okay, so I'm vehicle use in Cache Valley should be limited to increase air quality. According to Utah Development of Environmental Quality, the worst air is in Cache County. Dangerous particulate matter 2.5 rose into the unhealthy for sensitive groups category. The majority of Utah's population lives along the Wasatch Front. This consists of a chain of cities and towns along the Wasatch Mountain Range, from approximately Nephi in the south and Brigham City to the north. Along the Wasatch Front, the rapidly growing population is surrounded by mountains directly to the east and to the west, which create a bowl-like setting. This bowl structure, especially during the winter, results in enhanced inversions, where warm air sits above the populated valleys and cold air gets trapped below. Until a storm and associated wind disturbance comes through, many in Utah essentially swim in their own soup. The air pollution consists of particulate matter 2.5. And I was going to show pictures of the pollution. It's pretty bad, pretty intense. So basically, one of my main arguments is, considering how awful the air pollution is, I think putting restrictions on our vehicles and doing anything possible to reduce the pollution is, we should consider it at least. According to a study conducted by Dr. Randy Martin and others at Utah State University, approximately 4.5 and 10.3% of the valley's vehicles would fail inspection tests for NOx, and VOCs. And these vehicles were responsible for 25.4% and 47.8% of the valley-wide emissions. The study also found that the majority of the vehicles that would fail would be older than 1996. As of 2004, vehicle registrations from the Utah Department of Motor Vehicles showed the percentage of the vehicles that are 1996 or newer to be 49.4%, and therefore eligible for I&M testing with a simpler onboard diagnosis. So basically the study just showed, vehicles are playing a big part in the emissions. And there are some steps being taken. They are doing tests on the emissions. Sorry, let me pull it up. Cache County now has idle restrictions. In 2014, Logan City strengthened their anti-idling ordinance to make it against municipal code to idle for longer than 2 minutes when the temperature is above 0 degrees. Also, public transportation is free. So all the more reason to, keep up with these vehicle restrictions. They're trying to make it as doable as possible. And then also some success stories of other places who put vehicle restrictions. One good example is Oslo. It's also built in a geological bowl, which during winter in particular causes the city to suffer from serious air pollution problems. Data from the local government shows a marked decline in air pollution over the past decade. There has also been a drop in trips made by car from 35% of journeys in 2009 to 27% in 2018.
Just running out of time there, Paige, so stop you.
Okay. Well, let me find you guys. Anyways, we should put more vehicle restrictions.
Good summary. Okay, we'll now have opening arguments for the team that is against restricting vehicle use. You have 4 minutes starting from now.
Okay, I'm just gonna share my screen super quickly. Let's see. Did it work? Maybe. Okay. Oop, okay. So ours is, yeah, limiting vehicle usage will not solve Cache Valley's air quality problem.
Okay, so we propose that Cache Valley should not limit car usage because there are other factors in Cache Valley that contribute more heavily to air pollution. Cache Valley is not really a pedestrian-friendly region. Also, there are other ways to reduce air pollution while still driving. And limiting car usage is a really drastic change that would require a ton of community support and backing. Honestly, residents here in Cache Valley really value freedom. And if they're not willing to make a lifestyle change as small as wearing a piece of cloth on their face, it is highly unlikely that they're willing to make a lifestyle change as drastic as giving up the freedom of a personal vehicle. So we
definitely. Oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Go. Sorry.
Definitely, like, trucks are like, they populate the streets so much more than I feel like any other car in Cache Valley does, and they're the main contributor to any vehicle usage, any emissions from cars. And taking away people's trucks is just not realistic, or limiting the usage on that, because the gas mileage is already set on those. So it is not a very realistic alternative to take it away. And so we've recently just filled up, pretty much maximize the local landfill that's in more central Logan. And this is actually the North Logan landfill they're beginning to build. And the Cache Valley landfill is the main contributor to the air pollution in Cache County. It's approximately 135 feet tall, 85 acres large, and processes nearly 270 tons of material each day. And landfills emit landfill gas that consists mostly of methane and carbon dioxide, with small amounts of volatile organic compounds, bacterial decomposition of organic materials. Methane and carbon dioxide are both greenhouse gases, and methane is toxic. And there's other anaerobic reactions that occur in these that contribute to the other 50% of the inversion that we have here in the valley. And also agriculture is a huge contributor to any air pollution we have here, because cows emit so much methane. And according to the IPCC 5th assessment report, agriculture accounts for 24% of annual emissions. However, this does not include CO2 that is removed from the atmosphere by sequestering carbon and biomass, which offsets 20% of that 24, so it's pretty much more close to 44% of annual emissions. And there's over 268,000 acres of farmland in Cache Valley that raise tens of thousands of farm animals.
So driving cars actually can be cleaner than most people think. Since the Clean Air Act was passed in 1970, there have been serious improvements in car technology. Passenger vehicles are 98 to 99% cleaner for most tailpipe pollutants compared with cars from the 1960s. Fuels are cleaner. We've eliminated lead, and sulfur levels in fuels are 90% lower than they were prior to this regulation. US cities have actually improved air quality despite increasing population and increasing vehicle miles traveled. And also the standards that have been raised for these vehicles have sparked major innovation, and the car industry is a really big global industry. Also,
You have 10 seconds left, just a heads up.
So Cache Valley Transit System, free, and it's great. But once you get outside of Logan, it's just not on the scale that it would need to be to eliminate cars in the entirety of Cache Valley. Cache Valley is not very walkable.
Would go out of business, rely on cars.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's you guys up for the opening arguments. We now have rebuttals from the team that is for limiting vehicle use. During this, you're not supposed to present any new information, but Please pick holes in the other team's argument. You have 2 to 3 minutes, starting from now. I'll make sure you're unmuted.
Okay, so one of your guys' arguments was we just don't think people in Utah could do it, which I think is a bit of a negative outlook on how people can change. When I was reading up on how Oslo did it, they have an article where they said policy and behavior change may take a long time, but there exists a building momentum across the world that recognizes car-free streets as a critical way of facilitating urgent climate crisis, as well as strategy to improve health and well-being. So yes, people may like their trucks and it may be difficult at first, but some steps need to be taken. And I think that the first steps will be the hardest, but eventually, things will follow. If the system, if their public transportation system isn't what it needs to be, maybe a couple restrictions here or there will then encourage more development in that area. Also, it's also about people's health. These particles are so small, they're getting into people's lungs and damaging them. So I just think anything we can do would be a plus.
Okay. We have rebuttals from the against limiting vehicle use. You have up 2 to 3 minutes, starting from now.
Okay, so you have talked about Oslo, and that is a great example, and they've done a great job of limiting vehicle use, but that's only actually in the city center in Oslo. And the thing is, in a big city like that, everything is much more compact. People can have access to everything that they need, within walking distance. But Cache Valley is a very different story and demographic. We're much more spread out. It's a lot harder to walk and have access to everything that you need. And we're not talking, I do think it could probably be feasible to limit vehicle use within Logan city center, but we're talking the entirety of Cache Valley here. And that's a lot more land and a lot bigger scale. Yeah, Grace, do you have anything? You're muted, Grace.
Awkward. There we go. Okay. Yeah. So I think what the numbers you said was 47% of emissions are due to cars. So if I think that encouraging recycling and other things, which makes up the other 50% of the equation, if we focus on that more, which it would have more of an impact than the other half, even though they're so equal in the numbers of how much they contribute to pollution. I think just which one's easier to regulate would be not limiting people's car usage. So I think that was what I was going to say. But
I also think you talked about I do think people can change, and I think they're capable of changing their opinions, but it's just not really feasible to take away people's cars in an area this big. There's Grace, you said 268,000 acres of farmland, and I guess we need to define what limiting actually is. But if those farmers can't have access to vehicles to access all those acres of farmland, what are they gonna do? It's just a big area, and cars are honestly the most efficient way at this point to get around such a large area. So we can't exactly take them away.
Okay, I'm gonna have to stop you there because you're out of time. So now I'm gonna have the closing arguments for limiting vehicle use. You have about 1 minute starting from now.
Okay. I think that the current steps being taken in Cache Valley to reduce pollution, such as idle restrictions, vehicle emission tests, and the public transportation being made free, are all great steps in the right direction. I think there could be more restrictions put in place to better help the air quality issue. And I think it just takes the first difficult steps to finally have the dominoes fall, and everything, just based on the negative health side effects, I don't think we should just assume that because it's hard, it isn't the right thing to do, or it at least shouldn't be attempted to put more restrictions on vehicles, especially when they're such a large contributor to the pollution in Cache Valley.
Okay, that's a minute bang on. So well done there. I will now have the closing arguments for the vehicle use should not be limited. You've got 1 minute starting from.
Let's see. Oh, okay. So yeah, pretty much, although driving vehicles does contribute to air pollution in Cache Valley, limiting their use would be very difficult, if not impossible, just because mainly just the culture of Utah, which would take longer to change than we think changing other things would be. And also, let's see. And also, we think that since people using cars has encouraged so much technology innovation to decrease the amount that they pollute the environment, limiting them would only take away the incentive for companies to limit the pollution that cars cause. And also, many businesses in Cache Valley rely on cars. There's car washes, car detailers, body shops, tire shops, which if car usage was decreased a lot, those businesses would go out of business probably quite quickly or just lose a lot of their income. So, yep.
Good work. Righty. Okay, so now we're going to go to questions. If anybody has any questions for either team, I'll give you just a sort of countdown of 5 seconds, and then I'll come up with some stinkers. So if anyone has a question, please unmute yourself and ask now.
Well, I was just wondering, since I don't think I heard electric cars being brought in, and so I was wondering if there would be any or if it would be the same restrictions on electric cars, or if y'all think it should be differing for either side, really, I guess.
I think since we're focusing on like pollution and electric cars don't pollute, I think those would be fine. It would just be like, I guess, the source where they got it from. But I guess since we're talking about car emissions was the main issue, like I think from our side, those would be fine.
Yeah, and I think it would be good to promote electric vehicle usage, because then, you know, we could be not totally taking away cars and still reducing that. So I think we should be focusing on promoting greener vehicles instead of just taking away vehicles.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so because we got one to the not limit vehicle use, I've got one for the for limit vehicle use. You mentioned a great example of when vehicle use has been effectively reduced with the city of Oslo. However, one of the first places where vehicle use was ever attempted to be restricted was actually Mexico City, where they came up with the idea of, depending on what the first number in your license plate was, you could use your vehicle on different days. How, for the team that's for limiting vehicle use, what do you think happened as a consequence of this idea, and do you think that's something that would work here in Cache Valley?
You said license plates?
Yeah, so they just basically said, if there's first number on a license plate is odd, you can drive your car on Monday, Wednesday. If it's even, you can drive it Tuesday, Thursday, and everybody can drive it on Friday so that people can go away for the weekend. So
would they change their license plate or steal or?
You're actually really close. What it meant was, that, I'll let you finish because it's the second part of the question. So how do you think this would go down? What do you think would happen in Cache Valley?
Oh, so I did read a little bit about, you said Mexico City, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't the issue with that one also a status thing where people for driving for them was a part of their culture and a part of their status? So they would still carpool, but they were reluctant to take public transportation because that was kind of looked down upon.
There's a bit of that. One of the major things that happened is it caused massive social inequality because rich people can afford 2 cars. So they would buy one with a car that had the number plate was odd, and the other one, the car was even. However, there's an awful lot of people who were unable to purchase 2 cars. So it creates instantly this huge social inequity so that the rich people can drive whenever they want, whereas the people who are not so well off can't. So yeah, that was one of the issues when it went well. So I'm very impressed that you'd actually read up on that and had picked up on the social status and the idea of
I didn't bring it up in my debate because it didn't go over well.
Okay. Are there any other questions or any other statements we want to say? Okay, well, we'll go on to the polling. I'm going to do the same poll as before. Please answer truthfully, and it'd be good to see what people are saying. I end this poll, and I take it away, and then I start it again. Relaunch. Continue. Okay, should be live now. Righty. Again, this is kind of interesting. Again, we've got a massive split on position on the topic of 70% are for limiting vehicle use in Cache Valley and 30% are against it. But again, on terms of the who they think won, it's a 50-50 split. So we've got that same situation where people do not. So yeah, great work. Righty, I'm just going to end the recording now. Big round of applause. Well done to all you guys.